Machine versus humanity, the resources. You have all spoken about human resource versus machine resource. That the machine productivity.
The machine is a human resource. The machine is an adaptation and extension of us, unless I misinterpret you.
No, you're right. You said that, which has now taken over the capacity of human production.
Oh, right.
Therefore, there's a gap there. And then you spoke about the fact that we need to develop, look at the possibilities. And the two areas that you mentioned, the two quotes from Facebook are, just that. So bringing those two areas, and the fact that I am a socialist and I am an atheist. Talk about that.
I'm not. I've listened to what you've stated. I'm not quite sure. My brain isn't quite completely wrapped around the question that you've asked. So, as far as human resources, the machines, as far as socialism, as far as atheism, I think you put it all together. We're human beings with tremendous technical capability, coming from tremendous ingenuity. Coming from a long evolution of trying to figure out what we are, where we are, what we're doing. I don't call myself an atheist because that's actually a reaction to the beliefs of others. You know what I mean? That's a response. So if someone was to believe that there was 17 gods and they had some name and a bunch of people believe this, then I would supposed to be anti whatever their title is supposed to be. See, I don't recognize it or think that way. I'm also not a socialist because socialism is an historical notion, so it limits when you try to communicate. So we're dealing with communication issues. So atheism as a communication tool, I stay away from that unless I have to, unless it's just a type of thing where I'm pushed in a corner. And usually it's when I end the conversation, I'll say something like that. You know what I mean? So unfortunately, it's a static notion of association we have in communication. And I actually like David Bohm, famous quantum physicist, thinker, mathematician. He had talked about how we should learn language and speak in verbs, and there's no more nouns anymore. It should be transitional always. I don't know how that would work. And of course, Jacques Fresco talked about the need to transcend current old language. I mean, we still say up and down when it's obviously out, and in. All that kind of stuff permeates our awareness so much. But so that's what I would say to your question, because I didn't quite understand where you're going with it. But I hope that helps. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sandra Edwards, and I got 40% of industrial corrosion control. It's a corrosion inhibitor. It stops the corrosion process. And one of our clients, big name client, John Deere, water. We're at the point now in 2025 we won't have any clean drinking water.
I think it's roughly 2.3 billion people don't have access to essentially clean water right now.
In America.
Well, and across the world.
Well,
billion people.
But America kind of scares me because of the fracking.
Water's the next high commodity, second to energy.
Exactly. A friend of mine has been fighting for 5 years to buy 569 acres of water. Okay? Because the super rich, the superhumans are buying up all the water and the pump companies and anything to do with water. And then another deal is, I'm in high-end sales, so a lot of my stuff is buffalo. I have a herd of buffalo. Lamont buffalo is 1/3 of all the buffalo meat in the United States. Buffaloes are suppressed and oppressed in this country because Osama bin Laden and Bush own the beef trust. Buffaloes are not subsidized. If they subsidize buffalo meat the way they subsidize pork, chicken, and the rest of it, what people don't understand is buffalo is their original red meat. And when people eat buffalo, there's no cancer, there's no diabetes, there's no obesity.
Okay. Well, that's one thing I want to comment on is I appreciate everything you're saying, but since we have a short amount of time, if you have a question.
The question is this water.
Oh.
2025. It's not just the meat. The meat has been the red meat that's shooting carbon dioxide into.
Sure. Well, I talked about that in my prior film, and I have other lectures where I talk about the scarcity of water, and it's a very verifiable issue, and it's extremely serious. There are other academics out there that have noticed that a lot of water wars possibly are to be expected. There's a lot of rhetoric around that, and it's just one more example of this fragile state that
One
we're
more thing.
in.
The bee colony collapse. My brother is a farmer in Bixby, Oklahoma, right? And I'm from Bixby, Oklahoma. He's calling me, have you seen any bees? Have you seen any bees? I haven't seen any bees.
That's another one, and that's a.
Okay, so the food train is mine.
No, believe me, I'm well aware.
Just to ask, please try to phrase what you'd like to say into a question so we can actually participate.
We have to have a hard stop in about probably roughly 50 minutes, so we try to get to as many people as possible here. So yeah, thank you.
My question is probably something that you've been addressed with before, but I'll ask it again anyway. How do we deal with the fear of this flood of information? Because evidently most of the people in here are socially conscious people, but then we have this group of people who they are so attached to the media and they just cannot handle the reality of their situation. I mean, I guess ignorance is bliss. And also some of the stuff that was being talked about before about a film being made that maybe it might be more, I would say, to be less insulting on their level so that they can understand and absorb this information, because it's incredibly important that people are just completely, they either get extremely upset or, they'll fight you tooth and nail, and they don't even bother to listen to what is being said. The information is very, very valuable, obviously. What's the best way to deal with that? Because you want to be able to talk to your friends, you want to talk to your family, you want to talk to everybody. But you've got people who are just like, they don't want to,
Excuse me.
you know what I mean?
You know
Go
what?
ahead.
What I can suggest that you can do is join our chapter. Because
I
here's the
intend to
thing.
do that, so.
What you will find out is you'll get an opportunity actually to talk to people that will actually listen to you. Okay? I know it's really challenging with family, friends, coworkers, when all of a sudden you've had this change of heart or mind, and it's very challenging for them. And it's just kind of written off as not something worth listening to. But we've stood on street corners and we've talked to complete strangers, and you'd be amazed. There are people out there that will actually listen to what you're saying, and I think that's what you're asking for. And in time. It's only in time. I've had the same issues with family members, and little by little they'll start asking questions. So be patient. In the meantime, speak to those who are listening.
You already mentioned that the media is very powerful. And
Right.
we can also create media now. So,
Right.
Everybody in this audience can get media out there. And so do it any way you can. Use your talents and spread the message in the way that you can to your audience. And, that's the way that right now we're products of our culture. So let's change the culture a little bit by creating new media.
Can I ask another quick question? Or?
And I'll just conclude by one comment that in an interpersonal type of environment, you try to find something strategically that you have in common initially. So if I was to speak to someone who was devoutly religious, I would pull out my arsenal of Christian sayings, egalitarian Christian sayings, because in effect, what we advocate is the most Christian thing in theory that you could possibly come up with if they're actually interested in that type of element. And that's not trying to be manipulative. It's just, well, this is what you're associated with. Well, and then other times, as a general rule, sometimes I've gotten into situations numerous times where you realize you can't go any farther. So don't make your life hard on yourself. There's plenty of people out there that we have to get to. So if you reach one of those hostile points and you can just see that block, that wall go up, don't make a challenge out of it. Just kind of move on. Because eventually when mass appeal emerges, there'll be higher probability those that are so hardened to the radical nature of what we talk about that they'll begin to identify. Because people unfortunately do follow the herd. And if we can create the herd, well, we'd be in very good fortune.
Hello, I'm from the San Diego chapter. I have a question about organization. Since the split between Zeitgeist and Venus Project, I've observed a certain frustration among volunteers. One of them has thought of maybe just promoting the idea of a resource-based economy, whether it's delineated by TVP or Zeitgeist or even other groups like Atlas or other alternative economists. And I'm wondering, what do you think of this? Is this something we should discourage, encourage? Will it confuse our mission? Does it matter? I mean, if they're propagating ideas out there, does it matter if it's within the structure of the organization? Or what do you think?
Well, I'll let others speak about this, but let me just say really fast that I've had numerous contact with many other organizations. The Zeitgeist Movement was an initiator, and then there were many, many there were many, many organizations that spawned out. And when I first thought of this, and just as a general basis of what it meant to really have an effect, it's like critical mass has to come under the heading of something very general. That's why the Zeitgeist movement, in my hope, will be an umbrella. Not to say that everyone that's a part of it has to, it's really very simple what we're doing. There's not like a whole lot of hardcore specific stuff that's there. There's a lot of flexibility in the thought process of what defines this type of train of thought. But the beauty is it is a train of thought. And I've had numerous interactions with people that tend to get on a little bit of an ego pedestal, and they have really clinical views or very despairing views, and they have a usurper type of tendency. And I get to a point where if it's not pleasant, because there's so many of these organizations now, which in general I support, but I say, listen, why are you trying to fight us? Why can't you come in? It's not like we're going to try and redefine you in some way. There's an ego association that comes up. I guess someone could argue that with the movement itself, but the movement is the strongest that I know of, so why reinvent the wheel? I invite anybody to, the Venus Project is a little bit of a different institution. They always were. They were never an activist institution. They never collected people. They never had chapters. So there was a different kind of nature to what they were doing. And they worked, they are, in fact, our data set. We still advocate a resource-based economy, whatever name, but it's really not some static institution of a resource-based economy. It's an ongoing train of thought of what it means to do what's right in society for the well-being of everyone and the main ecological balance. And if we can get people to understand that and build upon that, as opposed to identifying with a static notion or even identifying with just the Venus Project, this is really important. And it's the definition of all intellectual evolution in the course of time. The problem is we tend to lock in institutions, and that's dangerous. There are no institutions. Even if the Zeitgeist movement didn't exist in any type of technical sense, but everyone had that value, which we hope that will flourish, of doing what's right and maintaining that balance, then I would love to see a nameless acceptance of a basic ideology, which we hope would come to fruition anyway. If people can't understand the train of thought, they're not even going to be able to live in the type of society that we advocate. The difference between the society today is that no one really even understands how it works. They don't understand the feudalistic nature of its evolution. They don't understand the top-down hierarchy and control and the sort of peasant-king relationship that are echoes of very ancient structures. No one really, if they realized what our structure was, they wouldn't stand for it. And that's the majority of people just don't understand where we come from. So here.
I would definitely, that's along the same lines as I was going to say. There really is no such thing as the Zeitgeist movement or the Venus Project. It's just a logic and a reasoning to let the natural progression towards a global, sustainable culture emerge. And it's like Peter said the other day, I think he said, there's those who get it and those who don't. And you can call yourself whatever you want. We're all kind of going towards that direction. So.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen through many movements. So, it's not like we're saying the Zeitgeist movement is the only movement that can make this happen. No, really, we're one approach. But I think what's unique about our movement is that we have a very solid set of ideas that work on a global scale that actually encompass a systems theory approach. And a lot of other organizations are focusing on a patchwork effort. So I always encourage people who have interest in any particular other organization to do both, because I think it's important for us to keep the bigger picture all the time so that we all realize that we're all connected, and it has to be a systems theory approach. So.
Okay, now, everyone hear us okay up there in the back? I just wasn't sure. Okay. And I just realizing, sorry for the heat. AC's cranked as high as it'll go, and I see some people standing up.
Okay. Okay, so I had a question for Peter. I wanted to ask you about something that I've come across, when I talk to people about the Zeitgeist movement and the, resource-based economic model. Obviously, we know that if we implemented this kind of advanced, system in the world, there would be a significant reduction in crime, because, as you were saying, there will be a huge reduction in crime because most crimes are related to the monetary system, which is absolutely correct. But then what people ask me about, what about the crimes that aren't related to money itself? What about crimes of passion, things like pedophilia, things like rape, things that aren't necessarily about that, it's more dealing with mental illness? So let's say we have this resource-based economy. a much more advanced society, much more looking after the welfare of human beings, how would we deal with those people that just slip through the cracks, you know, and have these deficiencies? How would we handle that, basically?
Well, my mother is a retired social worker, and she dealt with the creme de la creme in the South of people that would trade their family for pickup trucks, generations and generations of child abuse, levels of distortion that were so magnificent, to put it in a bizarre way. But you know what I mean. It's a very interesting question. The first thing I would say is that we have to remind people that this isn't a utopia. So there's a train of thought here where you're moving in the direction of sanity. Doesn't necessarily mean sanity is a static state for civilization. I do believe that if the logic that surrounds the basic ideas that we talk about, the sustainability issues, what it means to live together as opposed to fighting each other, that there's another level of that permeates and develops where people begin to treat each other differently in many different ways. First of all, the type of deprivation that a lot of people that have severe social distortion practices, not necessarily pedophilia, but definitely abuse. I mean, these are difficult things to diagnose. If you read Dr. James Gilligan, who I interviewed in my last film, he's got many unique angles on this because of all the analysis he's done. And almost all the people he's dealt with, serial rapists, serial murderers, they all come from very, very dark backgrounds. There's very few exceptions. Very few exceptions. And if you can create an environment economically, where the basic fear of development, the parental stress from in utero and all of those things that can happen to infect somebody and make them unbalanced, even straight out of utero to their childhood, infancy, childhood, again, which was talked about at length in the film. If you can create that environment, I have a feeling, and I think the logic supports it, that a great majority of those social distortions you talk of will resolve themselves. Will it resolve everything? But no, but I think it's on the same path of finding the root, which is really in many ways economic one way or another. Think about the stress of a father or the parents, even more specifically, who can't afford to have children, but something happens and they get pregnant, and their religious beliefs, which can be often very irrational, don't allow them to do anything about it. So they have multiple children in a very haphazard way, and the stress of that financially is so severe. The man has to work 3 jobs, and he breaks, and he starts to beat his children. You can really begin to see how the financial causality and the stress of living can begin to permeate. Is it a direct fix? But no. But at least if those things are resolved, you get real social scientists together to talk to these people. If I was somebody in the criminal justice system, if you will, just as James Gilligan so adamantly and accurately points out, you don't put these people in prison. You actually analyze them. You figure out what the hell happened. When you hear about a serial killer, that's an amazing anomaly of society. You want to know what happened to that person. You don't just throw them in a jail. You want to study them, put them in a nice environment. I mean, put them in an area where, because they're sick, obviously. They're not there they're really sick. They're just like sick, like they have a lung disease or something. There's severe problems there. And you study them and you figure it out, and then you build that education and you put it into the system by whatever means you can. So, you see my rationale? I mean. Oh yeah. I mean,
that's what I wanted. No, because Peter, it was just interesting. Just real quick, I'm gonna add one quick thing. Because like my dad's a psychiatrist, and I've met a lot of people, and they're successful people, they're family people, and all of a sudden you find out they have this side to them. There didn't seem to be any particular reason for them to have this problem or disorder.
Well, there is a reason, though. There has to be a reason. There's nothing that any of us in this room think, believe, or act upon that doesn't come from somewhere. And it just has to come from somewhere. Every word coming out of my mouth comes from somewhere. All my values and all the shit I talk about, that comes from somewhere. I didn't magically come up with that. There's no such thing really as originality. There's only the kind of combination of our life experience. I'm not denying genetic and biochemical influences. They're there, but they don't hold a candle. They don't hold a candle to the influences that come from the social environment, especially with our behavior and how we treat each other. So, yeah, but great question. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Up here at the top. Can you see me up here? I'm on my knees here. It seems like being raised in this in a monetary system, all of us, we're all experiencing some level of disorder, psychological, and it goes down through the every realm of our lives. My question is, it seems the first feat is to change our thoughts and how we think about things, how we perceive the world. But then how would you help people to actually become the type of person to live in a resource-based economy, the type of person who would actually not just think along these lines, but actually get out and do, even with limited resources, getting out and becoming the type of person that lives in these things?
I'll let others answer this as well, but I'll just say off the cuff that, I mean, the movement itself is probably the best value shifter we have right now. People that engage and see like-minded identification and actually feel normal around people as opposed to the general distortion that we see. You know, again, people do what they need to survive, and I'm amazed at the development that's happened, because all of us should be out, in theory, trying to find ways to make money and survive. But we choose to take our time because we see a larger order problem at hand that far exceeds the selfish narrowness that this system likes to claim as divinity, if you will. So, you know, the movement itself is just wonderful to see the communication, and I certainly feel more normal in my day-to-day lives just to know that there are people that I identify with. But does anybody else like to add something?
Yeah, definitely. What I've discovered for myself personally is that it's an uncovering and it's an ongoing process. And if you're thinking in terms of what can be shared with someone else and to help them or facilitate them to becoming a person that can live in a resource-based economy, just put yourself in that position. And the whole concept, as Peter reiterates about the static notion, like, oh, I get it, well, you're going to find out as you progress that you're going to get another level. You're going to get glimpses. And that should tell you right there, as you progress, the conversations that you're going to have and the people that you're around and who you communicate with, they will progress as well. If not, they'll fall by the side and additional people will come in. So what I think I'm saying is, don't be overly concerned if they're getting it. Pay attention to your own, because we're no different from each other in that sense. You will in time discover and uncover that it is not static. You will continue to get these great glimpses of what can really be. And just enjoy that. And enjoy the company of others who share that as well.
Can I just finish up with that last one real quick? I mean, since we don't live in a resource-based economy yet, it might be extremely painful to act like you are living in a resource-based economy, because we're still in a very painful system. So, you know, just look at the root understanding of your behaviors. It's extremely freeing to look underneath and really look back and just it'll make you feel better, and study, read, learn about science.
And meet like-minded people, so you have other people to reflect the values you're trying to take on back at you, and it'll make a difference.
One more thing. There's a lot of you have probably seen that Star Trek episode when the two humans have been frozen and they wake up in the future, and the captain tells them they're going to drop them at Earth, but everything's changed and there's no trace of your money or your office or your belongings. And the man's very concerned, saying, well, what am I going to do? And the captain says, oh, we've evolved beyond an economic reality. You don't have to worry about that. And he goes, what's the challenge? And the captain says, personal development, whatever you want to excel yourself. So I think it's such we're like death and taxes. You know, we all get conditioned to think that it's inevitable. You have to. And so just beginning to think differently, that there is another way, and hopefully before the collapse, so that we can begin transitioning. But usually it takes things to get so bad before humans change. But I think we're already in that. Personally, I wish I was born in the future and we're already there. But then I realized, we're part of the transition, however that's going to look. So.
Awesome. I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody who's a part of this movement, and the chapter heads for doing the work and for putting it together and bringing it forward to us. It's interesting, the Star Trek point, big fan here, but it seems like from one perspective, civilization has been many different cultures brought to their highest point of civilization and then being overrun at that point by hungry other cultures that were not as civilized. And when we talk about this leap of civilization that you guys are proposing. I understand we're living in a different age now, but you can see on the map there, mostly we're in the northern hemisphere and the western heads of civilization, and resources and just behavior and cultural impact may have, there may be some barbarians waiting at the gate for the ones who are able to make the leap mentally to work in a resource economy. And it also sort of, I'm sorry, it sort of indicates a fracturing of the governmental structures, protectionary, military, those things. And so I'm just curious if I'm sure you've thought about it, what the next step would be at that point if things became more fractured and certain parts of the world were able to make some of these advances. How does it hold together and not fall backwards?
Do you mean in a transitional process, or
Yes.
you mean after an instatement of the society, if you will, or both?
Well, I think there has to be a transitional.
Right. Frankly, it's going to be always transitional. There's always going to be transitional developments. Before I forget this summer, there's people over here that have had their hand up for a while on the sidelines. I feel guilty for them because you're so far away. The barbarians at the gate are in mass, and this is, I hate to say it, but we all know what's happened to other societies that have attempted to do something different. Though this is what makes our job so much more difficult, and while on one side this is one of the most improbable types of ventures you could come up with, but yet the most important, given where we are and where we have to go, which is why I come back to critical mass. The thing that fails all social movements or any organization is fracturing of the movements that exist. So if you can get that integrity on a global scale across all borders, across all social systems, and get that harmony there where it's holographic, as we point out, that's just not a fundamental idea. That's because we need it to be holographic. We can't have people in certain positions that if they're removed or what have you, it can't have an effect. So in the higher state of this movement, it's really operating as an invisible entity of mass where it's literally unstoppable because there's no heads. It can't be fractured because the ideology is so ingrained. It doesn't matter where people are. It's a motion. It's a singular human motion, and there's no government or army or anything that could possibly stop anything like that. It's never happened in the history of humankind, but it's going to have to. People have to get down to the basic level of survival, understand that, and develop their values and the social approach based on that simple referent, which we've been so decoupled from. And I think inevitably it's going to happen. I have no idea how much suffering and turmoil might emerge before something like that occurs. But just to quickly re-answer your question, I really believe the critical mass issue, that's why people say, well, let's try to start a resource-based economy in Mexico or Venezuela. Do you realize what the corporatocracy would do if someone attempted that? The communist, they would go apeshit with propaganda on any country, just as they do. All the coups and overthrows of any leader that attempts to do anything social on a grand scale. This system has as John McMurtry calls it has a built-in cancerous defense system. And it's not just leaders and governments, it's actually people. The self-appointed guardians of the status quo really want to believe that what they're involved in, even if they're poor and living at the corner of bedlam and squalor, they really want to believe that their system is for them because that's how strongly they identify with it. So there's a tremendous barrier. But again, the biopsychosocial pressures are there. They will continue to inhibit. We continue our work of education. Eventually critical mass emerges. And then all it takes is one big global action to show the strength of this movement in basically a civil disobedience kind of way. The example I like to use, which I don't advocate, but imagine if 50% of the people in America just refuse to pay their federal income tax. There's nothing the U.S. government would ever do. They couldn't possibly. But people are terrified to do that en masse because they don't know the mass could be there. And that's what we have to overcome. And once that happens, it's over. I mean, there's nothing that any power establishment can do. There aren't enough people. The military would run away with their tail between their legs if they had the type of global mass that we advocate. So.
Well,
a Honda Civic and a Camry is blocking other people?
Over. Okay.
All right, all the automobiles are in order. Let's assume for a moment that critical mass has been reached. What now? I mean, what's to stop us from building the first city of the Venus Project somewhere? I know I saw your film, I saw you speak. You said it's a financial issue to getting all the resources together. It's very expensive.
Cultural issue, though. Even if you built the first city, it could only be used as an example. People couldn't really live there because of what the comment I just made. Even if a country attempted to do this, they would have to have some massive security measures to stop what John Perkins appropriately calls the corporatocracy in the military-industrial complex. We can't keep fooling ourselves about what the military is and has always been. It's there to maintain territorial balance and to preserve certain economic modes that benefit those that can control things. Hence, the West has always done East India Company, Britain, the age-old empires. It's just imperialism continues its rotation. And this is why building a singular city, unless it's a test city, unless it works in a certain way to educate, which is what Jacques always advocates. That's why he always says we can't just build a city and expect people to live there. There's too many factors that could come into play. Not to mention the cost. You really need to utilize resources to do it. But in the end, it's really a cultural transition. It's as much as we talk about technology, all of this is really a value system transition more than anything else.
It also wouldn't be a global system. And that it's important to understand that what we're advocating is a global system. It would be a closed community. And we have a lot of people that are involved in the movement that they're interested in, I want something as close to this as I can get right now, and maybe I should build a commune, and we should start growing our own food. Well, that's very different than what we're talking about. But go do that and talk about this. I say if your passion is to be with a community that shares the values and live in some sense that's outside of the normal way we're getting resources, then please go do that. But keep in mind that we can't achieve what we're talking about until it's a global system and we're off of money and we have those high-tech resources versus low-tech, because we really are trying to honor, we're not adding to human labor and human stress, but reducing. And there have been people that have gone on to those projects who have had a very different experience and thought, this isn't for me, but it's not what we advocate. So I encourage people, if you want to get involved with something like that, because we hear that a lot, to do that. But keep in mind that we're thinking bigger. And we need mass awareness and people doing mass awareness activism to achieve what we're really talking about.
Just wanted to add to that. If you were able to build successfully the resource-based city, let's just say, within the greater system, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Resources that are necessary are scattered all over the earth. Not knowing what's available inhibits the ability to perpetuate yourself on your own self-efficiency. Also, in time, if there was ever, and you probably would understand this, any sort of decay of the societies surrounding you, you're going to have to really defend yourself, because when the grass is greener inside, you're invaded. It's a global system because we're accounting for all the resources of the planet and all the people of the planet, not just a select few. So,
and once there's a fully realized, awareness throughout the whole entire world, one of the things that we do first is the whole planet would just kind of declare everything as the common heritage, as we put it, common to everyone. And when that happens, there's really nothing we can't do. Whatever's. Did we answer your question?
Yeah, well done.
And also, just to point it out, that there's a lot of things that haven't been talked about as far as resource management and the systems approach that we have in a lot of our other materials. There's a whole slew of technical stuff that we talk about that can initiate a lot of the things that resolve perhaps some of the conflicts that you might imagine. I just want to throw that out there because there is a completely different approach that could be taken far outside of the arcane political system that we know today with the appointed dictatorships that we seem to all marvel in and are convinced actually provides some type of equitable balance of social contribution, if you will. You know.
So one more quick thing. In dealing with the system as it is today, where does the Zeitgeist movement stand on being sovereign, being a sovereign citizen?
There is only the earth. Everything else is contrived. There's nowhere to hide anymore. There's no reason to block yourself off anymore unless you want perpetual war. What's happened, the tribalism had its place. It evolved. We had to do tribalism. We didn't understand science and technology. We didn't understand what was possible. Advents of extremely efficient technology, resource management, understanding molecules, what actually comprises our ability to create. The new realization is that we can provide for everyone, get the necessities of life available, ease the stress of society, reduce crime, stop war, if we can grow up enough to realize if we just share our resources and apply a systems approach, which is what the earth demands if we want to sustain ourselves. If we can just follow that train of thought and get people to understand and identify with it, sovereignty is an echo of a tribalist notion of separatism and warfare. I know a lot of people hate that. There's so many patriots out there that attack me, and they don't understand what they're talking about. They don't understand how racist it is to be patriotic. They don't understand the biasness. It's racism with a flag when you hold up your flag. And it's just people have to get beyond that, and eventually they will.
Were you referring? Yeah. You're referring to the lot of things that people do in the courts to kind of be sovereign. And,
sovereign man stuff, right.
Well, if that's something, if that's the best way you think you can make an impact on the system and try and, escape out of something, if that's the thing you're into, then that's fine. But I mean, there's such an overarching approach that we're into that we don't really hone in on one area, and there's a lot of trouble that you could. I mean, there's so many. They often just change the rules on you, in the mix of it. So I really don't know too much about that, but
nothing is fixed in the legal system. Nothing.
I would just add that when I think of those things, I think that I've been interested in that sort of movement and learn some about it, but I always think it's always contingent upon the person having guns believing you or understanding you. So there is an element of force that you would have to contend with if that doesn't work, because that's just a whole, it's all fiction anyway, and so it's always being rewritten anyway. I feel like, our focus is more at the root causes, and we'll get you where we want to go.
I would just say one final thing is that we're not about patchwork. Even though there's things that we do, then there's the charity things that we have on the horizon. The Zeitgeist Media Festival will be a global food drive for all the sympathetic events that do it. We're trying to bridge to really do help things in a temporal sense, but that isn't the solution. As much as we want to get people to help, and as much as we might identify with certain things within the system, people that go out and build sustainable communities in a lo-fi sense, that's all great in transition. We have to be self-preserving on some level. But the Zeitgeist movement is just about the absolute final goal. And someone has to start it. Somebody has to get in a movement like that together. We can't keep pulling back and try to pretend that the little games we play will have final resolution when they won't. That's why if you read through all of our materials, the highlights of what we talk about, global unification, world resource management, all of these things have a solid train of thought of what it means to actually manage ourselves on this finite planet that we share, the habitat that we've evolved into, So the train of thought's there. We're not messing around with patchwork, even though it's there, but that's not our focus. So.
I had a question about, it's kind of a two-part question. Could you guys give me a summary of these globally unified values the movement is trying to represent? The second part is, how do we balance the power? This in itself is a structure being created, and we are looking for a mass to represent these ideas. So how do we balance that and not let it consume us and not let it become a structure we're trying to recreate and destruct?
Do you want to go first?
In regards to the first part of your question, some of the summary of some of the values that we're trying to express. I know we use these words, and not everyone is maybe have an understanding, a referent to what value we're talking about. No money, no property, starting as the carrying capacity of the Earth is a starting point for resource management, a systems theory approach, which is something you can actually look up. Has a 3-sentence definition to how you would actually manage a system, understanding that the Earth is a holistic system, and so you would have principles of dynamic equilibrium. If you cut the trees down faster than they grow back, you're going to run into a problem. You end up creating scarcity. You end up damaging the environment. So things like that. I mean, I'm just throwing out a few of them. I don't have all of them quickly to throw off at you like that, but that's just an example of some of these the global values, or if you will, that we're talking about. Sure. Just don't let us forget the second part of your question.
Right. As I was listening to everyone answer questions, ask questions, it seems like we already kind of have an elitist view of these ideas. We are better than those that do not follow, and we push them aside instead.
Well,
so how do we do that?
I would say that there is a qualifier of something being better, an idea being better, if it has a referent to something that can be supported. That's why I bring up in my presentation the subject of scientific causality. So it's not just a whimsical thing where we say, well, we can share the Earth. We're not talking about poetry. We're talking about the fact that our social sustainability is dependent on these things based on what history has shown us. We're not talking about dynamic equilibrium and the need to preserve the rainforests and everything else just because it's a poetic notion, or that we think we're better or pretentious because we want to save things. It's because we have to, because it's a part of our ecosystem and it's that delicate. My response to your first question is that basically we have to extrapolate our values not from what we've been taught traditionally, but what we've learned from our environment, hence scientific investigation. As cold as it seems, everyone gives science a bad rap. Science is the warmest thing you can have. It's telling you what's real, what truth actually is. So we listen to what's happening. We look at research. We try to stop ourselves from building upon traditional notions that might come from echoes of bad analysis from centuries before. People put me down for my criticism of religion. People can believe whatever they want. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's going to provide sustenance for them and their family. Doesn't mean it's going to actually sustain our society. So the elitist thing, a little bit of projection. I don't think any of us are trying to be elitist at all. We're trying to say, well, we know 1 + 1 is 2. If someone thinks 1 + 1 is 3, well, we have a debate there. And I guarantee you the guy with 1 + 1 is 3 is going to have a pretty hard time navigating their life if they continue that type of viewpoint. One quick thing, though. And as far as the second part of your first section, first time you asked the question, regarding power, the thing is that since everything that we've evolved out of in this tribalism has been based upon the conquering of power. It's been based upon the assumption that some are deserving the right to life, some deserve to die. It's based on the assumption that not everyone can have everything. It's based on scarcity. We have these values that are ingrained in us. And that's basically just not true anymore because of our ingenuity through technology, our ability to recreate substitutes. There's so many levels to it now. So power will be the neuroses of power, the need for people to want more and control, that will have no feedback reward mechanism anymore. In a new society where the whole system is unified, where everyone's working to basically make sure the system's working. I mean, in other words, they're not blindly contributing labor for self-interest. They contribute to the system just as everyone else does, and what they gain back is so rewarding and knowing. I mean, even on a different level, sorry for the tangent, but if you look back at your life, most of the things that you'll find that you like are not how much money you made or how many people you had sex with or all the values that are ingrained in this culture, that materialism that's there. It will be what you did to service. It'll be that guy you helped across the street, or when you helped your mother do this, or this type of stuff. I think is very much in the condition, our human condition, and that I think will be fully blossom, where people will be racing ahead of each other to try and resolve problems. Just like I'm amazed that we have a volunteer fire department across this country. I mean, these are very dangerous acts, and there's people doing this even in this sick society, where most people won't do anything without narrow monetary reward and self-interest. So I hope that helps. I mean, once it's turned around, I think it will flourish in a completely different direction, and it will only be in your betterment to preserve the system. And if anything does go awry, then you have elements of redundancy within the system. I'm much more concerned about errors in the system than I am someone abusing it.
Yeah, one of the ways that I sum up people who have a fear about the power being abused in the system, I say, well, if you look at the design, it's that the actual design of what we're proposing would remove the reward for exploitation, so the need to exploit someone would go away. And that's why it's such a great thing to advocate, because why would you want to steal from someone if you have access to the same things they have? So it starts to shift everyone's behavior in a way that you're not thinking about, oh, I need to overpower this person to get something. In this, model that we're proposing, that would, not be applicable.
I've talked to the leaders of two small but long-running public documentary series in Los Angeles, and both of them would love to show the movie. However, they've both refused the movie, moving forward. That is, they would love to show it, but they've refused because of its length. 2 hours seems to be something like the magic number cutoff point, after which something like this doesn't get shown in these forums.
I've considered making a shorter version for those that don't have.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I've considered doing. I haven't had time. The reason it's so long is I really just want to drill it in, and I just fuck it, let's make it 5 hours. It easily could be, because I cut so much out of it, but I agree with you. I know, I get that all the time. Film festivals are like, we like it, but it's way too long. Anyway, I'm working on that. So. That's your job, Summer.
That's your job, sir. There's a very persistent hand up there. There's been a hand over here for a while. Maybe we're working way up the center.
All right. Because we do live in a finite world with finite resources, my question is, because it takes so much time to gain critical mass, what are we going to do if it takes too much time and we run out of the resources, so we can't do the original idea proposed by the Moving Forward movie, where we start with a world with plentiful resources? What if we use that up before and we go to the point of no return? What do we do then? What happens to the movement?
There's no better motivator than to search for a solution than when there are no more resources, and talk about exponential growth. I think that you can take advantage of when you hear news stories that are just showing how bad it is, to say, okay, what more evidence do you need that we need to start talking about a different approach, and then have a way in. And I think as things decline, unfortunately, not that that's something we think is a great thing, suffering, but it's a motivator. So I think that you understand that that's also a factor at play.
If human society ends up as an evolutionary cul-de-sac, well, at least we tried,
I wrote this down, so hopefully it'll fly by really quick. Seems that part of what has the human race in the quandary of enslavement that it's currently in is that a small group of elite individuals have erroneously thought that they have a sense of superiority over the rest of us. That, in part, is what has caused the heinous atrocities that have taken place on this planet, this erroneous sense of superiority of one human being over the other. How will it be possible for the Zeitgeist movement to enact and manifest goals that seem to depend upon global equality when the reality on this planet is that the levels of erroneous superiority which we humans have over one another absolutely pale in comparison with the levels of superiority which we humans on a whole and as a species have over all other non-human animals on this planet. In other words, the Zeitgeist movement's ends seem to depend upon a level of psychological, if not spiritual, development that we as a species seem to currently be far from. How can we address that?
Well, I would say, first of all, that we have to get down to the lowest common denominator of where those behaviors come from, because I wholeheartedly agree with everything you've said. But we can't forget that the values that are dominant, whether it's the values of, I mean, people look at, say, George H.W. Bush, and lots of speculation on that guy. Ooh, is he stupid? Is he a Satanist? Is he just mean? Is he evil? He's doing, frankly, what he thinks is right. George Bush was raised in an elitist family, skull and bones. He was put into an elite world, and his values are explicitly elite. And the beauty of the elite, in their mind, is they actually believe that what they're doing is right. And even if it's sacrificing thousands, millions of people, they still have, not in a narcissistic way per se, they still believe it's in some larger context for the greater good. So you got to put that in focus. The people, but I would say in contradiction that, maybe it's not, but I think the people that do have a wanting and a need to be balanced, to want to see and identify and to find that equality, far outnumber those that have the severe distortion that are in power. Yes.
That have that distorted view
yes.
of existence that seem to have the power.
Well, that is a chicken and egg thing too, isn't it? Because what you have is the more it comes in, the more for them to even be in that position is really a form of distortion. If you really think about those that are in positions of great wealth and power, for them to even get to that point requires some severe, personal integrity compromises, to put it nicely. And what it comes down to is that we want to eliminate the power system itself. And in the global critical mass we talk about, I mean, none of these figures stand a chance. No matter how many bodyguards or bank accounts, it doesn't pale to what a mass movement could do to basically scare those individuals into oblivion, and then maybe even, hopefully, convert them. And to realize that they would live better, be happier, much more fulfilled, to maintain a true social connection, as opposed to the way most of them behave today.
I want to add that I know that we have supporters that are not as vocal, but sort of in an underground sense in the military and in the police forces. And these are people who understand that, unfortunately, their job is supporting a structure that they no longer wish to support, but they are a support structure for when we're ready to turn this around. So if you think about it, the elite are only as powerful as the human mass tools that they have at their disposal, and as long as people are contributing to that, then yes, they have power. So we're supporting their values right now as a general society, but as soon as things, people start realizing, okay, resources are being depleted, and I don't have the quality of life that I was promised. I think you're going to see things turn, and that includes people who contribute to the power, if that makes sense.
And just a final note that's a little bit of an aside is that the State of the Union address by Barack Obama, when the economic collapse has been lingering for quite a while, it continues to do its slow, all the money injection starting to fade now, and it's beginning to arc down and gain acceleration again. What did he say? He said, we need to compete more. And I almost fell out of my chair when I heard him say that, because that is precisely the type of elitist concept that's causing distortion to begin with. But that is what the system is. So it's like if they throw gasoline on the fire thinking that it's water. That's all they know, which is unfortunate. Otherwise, it's socialism. Ooh, and then, communism is just a step to socialism. And then fascism is always there in the echoes and waiting in the sidelines. So, anyway.
All right. Finally, I was recognized. Okay. First, I had a short, silly answer for what he was asking about the hypothetical prototype, although I don't necessarily agree with the Venus Project's solution to things being practical. I've got other ideas, but since you couldn't actually build a real prototype, you could build a TV show version, or in my silly little world, I'd build like a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or Muppet Show version to introduce it to the people, to show how the things would work, and you could pawn it off on the animal characters or whatever, and also at the same time have them represent the different stereotypes of the world as they try to go through these different, mechanisms and stuff. Because if the technology's there, it could work, but you just have the pretend version and watch them try and go through the trials and tribulations of that. So there's a lot more to it.
That's great.
All right. Then I've just got 3 short, quick questions, and actually all are for Peter. 1, where are you based out of? 2, is there a Zeitgeist 4 in the works yet? And 3, if so, just hypothetically, if I were some diabolical mastermind who's been working on solutions to this stuff for the last 5 years, including like an embedded project within the American media and my own zoo project, which is like an alternative solution to the Venus project that kind of uses a reusing model of all the buildings and things that already exist. We just basically re-educate the population by tricking them into learning via the power of the entertainment industry and whatnot, because trust me, I've been working on this. So how would I get in touch with you to unload all these notebooks and volumes and volumes and volumes of ideas just for your perusal?
Well, basically, probably shouldn't say this, but there's an email that you can email me, which I do check. Well, it's very simply Peter at TheZeitgeist. Peter at, and I currently reside in Southern California. And yes, Zeitgeist Beyond the Pale, which people need to remember, the Zeitgeist film series is not necessarily a representation of the movement, because I might just get really angry and do something very strange that is not going to be very positive for the movement. But it is coming out in late 2012, Zeitgeist Beyond the Pale, which will be very simply a commentary work on the social staples of society in a very, very direct way, kind of in the same style of my first film, in the shotgun narrative. So. Well, sure. Sure. But strategy of communication is what we're all here for. That's why the film series is what it is, and I take different angles with each approach. And one way or another, my films or anything I do in an artistic sense always supports the values of all of this in some level, but isn't necessarily representative of it. But I agree. Good point. I mean, that's strategy of communication. What's that? We're at time. You can conclude.
Actually, do you want to conclude the registration thing? Or is there anyone else?
Okay, it seems we're at our conclusion, and if you...
2 hours already. Done.
Wow. For those of you who didn't get a chance to pick up some of the literature that was downstairs, there is a mission statement card there that has the ZeitgeistMovement.com address on there, and there are also some registration cards if you're interested in future events coming out of Los Angeles, whether it's participatory or just you want to show up, either way. Is there anything else? Thank you.
whisper of her waves. The tide was flowing in fast to the land. Purple days, purple waves.